Hi everyone. For this class, I've been researching Carlos Alberto Torres. My name is Luke Shoemaker, and this is my final paper outline presentation. And my rationale for choosing Carlos Torres was that, Carlos Torres is a sociologist by training, and I just thought it was really fascinating how he links education to the role of state and power. It really looks at global pressures and how those influence states and how that's has a top-down effect on education systems. He also looks at how education is affected by political and social changes as well. And Carlos Torres has contributed to the development of the political sociology of education. He's credited with inventing that field. And for his biography, so Carlos Torres, he was born and grew up in Argentina. His father had less than a high school level of education, but he really believed in education and encouraged Carlos to continue and obtain his degree. And Carlos Torres eventually obtained his degree in sociology and used that to hold various teaching positions at universities in Argentina. Also in Argentina, Torres opened a Frarian school, which emphasized democratic values, and this was despite a political or a chaotic political climate in Argentina, and this eventually led him to decide to exile to Mexico for his safety. And while in Mexico, he earned his Master of Arts and served as director for the Department of Educational Research, focusing on adult education. And he served as director for a couple of years before he earned a full scholarship to Stanford University. And when he first started at Stanford University, he didn't know any English. So he talks about it was a struggle at first, but he was able to earn his second master's and also his doctoral degree in international development education. And then his most recent, where he still works today, where he started working in 1990, is at UCLA. And he's now the Distinguished Professor in the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies, and he continues to produce work criticizing educational injustice. And in Carlos Torres' work, we see this notion that education exists for two primary reasons in modern societies. The first is to prepare the labor force for economic competitiveness of the state, and secondly, to empower citizens to participate in polity, so to become active, engaged citizens in their communities. And his methodological tendencies, so he often uses mixed methods approaches that follow a theoretical framework based in moral argument for his aims of education. So he often presents his framework first, and then his methods. The quantitative data often is used to describe the social, political, and ideological realities of the state, and this is done through using a heuristic framework. So he talks about this framework that his team develops, and it's not perfect, but it's a working framework that allows him to normalize all the the various factors, whether they're social, political, or ideological, normalize them across the nations, and that allows for comparative analysis. And then his qualitative methods, capture a more complete picture of reality. So, for example, in one study where he compared the adult education systems across 3 nations, he interviewed adult learners, before and after they completed their program to evaluate the impact of the program on their lives. For his ontology, Torres possesses a realist ontological belief. So, he just believes that reality can be described, albeit imperfectly, and this is evidenced through his use of quantitative data to analyze, political and social reality. For his epistemology, Torres often complements quantitative analysis with the in-depth interviews, and also focuses on how adult learners can apply their knowledge for personal empowerment. Okay, he makes recommendations there. And this aligns with what Schraw describes as a contextualist epistemological belief, which is one that emphasizes the context in which learners acquire knowledge, okay, the political, social context in which they acquire knowledge, and also the authentic personal application of that knowledge, okay, so how they use that knowledge for personal empowerment. Carlos Torres, he seems to have a high view of generalizability, and this is seen, he makes recommendations across, well, not just national context, but also across social stratification, and he really advocates for, individuals, who would be thought of as being on the lower levels of, socioeconomic stratification. And one example of a study is one where he compared the adult education systems across 3 nations. And he chose the 3 nations because they represent different levels of socioeconomic development. These nations were Tanzania, Mexico, and Canada. And in his conclusion, he is very critical of the adult education systems in each of them. And he says that they all seem to emphasize economic gain and competitiveness in a global market over the empowerment of the individuals themselves. Okay, and his impact, Carlos Torres' lived experiences shaped his lifelong career and passion to end prevailing inequality in the global world. His impact can be broadly characterized in 3 elements. So first is his scholarly work in Latin American education in comparative perspective. Second is his work on Paulo Freire. Paulo was a close friend of Torres, and Paulo had also been exiled politically. And when Freire passed, Torres, he mentions he fell into depression, but then was also, inspired to write his book, which was a big contribution to the field of international education. And this book was titled Education, Democracy, and Multiculturalism, Dilemmas of Citizenship in a Global World. And then finally, the third element is the invention of the political sociology of education. He has held numerous leadership positions, and more recently was appointed the UCLA Chair in Global Learning and Global Citizenship Education for UNESCO. And in this position, he's given various talks, and in one talk, he describes 2 key elements of citizenship. And the first is civic minimums. And this is the idea that citizenship, it rests in material bases first, okay? And so, in this, he talks about the 1/7, okay, of Earth's population. 1/7 of the 7+ billion humans that live on Earth live on less than $2 per day. And this raises the idea or the question that, how can we expect these individuals to be good citizens without that material basis, okay? And then second, he talks about civic virtues, and this is the idea that citizens need to feel proud of, what they do. They're, feel proud of their cultures, their civilizations, and they need the opportunity to learn their identity in various ways, and find fulfilling work that benefits their communities. One thing that works against equality, okay, that Torres is very critical of is colonialism, and he describes colonialism as certain actors being able to reorganize the world at their own pleasure, and take advantage of resources that were not theirs. And he describes that moving to post-colonialism is something we need to do to combat that inequality that exists globally. And this top-down idea is comparable to the ideas of John Myers, who brings a different perspective, right, a world education culture perspective, but however they have many similar ideas, and this may come from Myers, also being a sociologist by training. Okay, and then finally, I myself would also pursue a world system theory, so I really see the value in Carlos Torres's arguments. And I really feel that access and opportunities for adult education is critical to empower individuals, for them to become active citizens with identity and purpose who can benefit their communities. One thing I would add to Torres' criticism of adult education emphasizing economic gain is just that that corporations, we're talking about combating inequality. Corporations have been a tool that supports modern life and economic opportunities for individuals. However, the adult education can help bring increased talent to those corporations. But one thing about corporations, right, is that they're facing increased social and community pressures, right, to meet those needs. And so increased talent can ultimately help corporations meet those needs and build a more sustainable future. So thank you for listening, and here are the references.